Very excited to have you all join us today as we introduce the Kapoq MCP. We'll be pulling back the curtain on something we've been building that will enhance the way a lot of us work. I will get right into it. For those of you unfamiliar with Kapoq, we're an end-to-end brand management software solution that helps agencies and brands manage all parts of the Amazon and Walmart business. With over 6 interconnected modules, the system communicates across various data sets, brings them together seamlessly, and alerts you to opportunities daily, if not intraday, while providing levers for you to take action. So everything that you see here, from inventory, using solutions that we built for demand planning and forecasting, to advertising, budget automation, bid management, is available. The app provides audits across your catalog, monitors changes. There's an account and item level P&L for profit reporting and analysis, solutions to help with customer experience, and a lot of it's brought together through robust analytics. So at the core, we are holding this session as we're truly experts in APIs, e-commerce, and marketplace data, and know how to handle it. And all the data that lives within our ecosystem is available to our customers. So we'll talk more about that today. But switch the slide. I'm Shelby Rothenberg, Director of Customer Success. I spend most of my days working with agencies and brands across our customer base, along with our CS team. So I'll be sharing some of the use cases I'm already seeing come to life, and I'm joined with George here. George, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. My name is George Vimontis. My background's in computer science. I've been with Kapoq since the beginning. I do a lot of development work on the advertising side. And lately I've been doing a lot of more cutting edge research projects within Kapoq, building out like more scalable ways to present data to our customers, and also new ways to let people connect with our data, which brings us to the presentation today. So I was the developer of the MCP server we'll be talking about, and that's essentially my background. Shelby?
Love it. Our agenda today, we're going to spend a little time on the why before the how, because MCP server is a new concept for a lot of people and the framing matters. And we'll talk about the data and how Kapoq as a solution enriches the data, but also how Kapoq allows you as users to enrich the data further. We'll go into the live demo as the main event, and we'll open things up for a Q&A. You don't need to hold your questions till the end, so feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be moderating and identifying questions we can serve to George, and if we don't get to everyone, we'll be sure to follow up after. But George, let's talk about what is an MCP server.
Sure. Thanks, Shelby. So this stands for a Model Context Protocol. What this is an open standard that was developed by the company Anthropic. For those of you who aren't familiar, Anthropic is the company that makes Claude. So they developed this model back in 2024, so very recently. And the idea behind it was to give a more structured way for AI agents, AI chatbots, et cetera, to basically communicate with a server that provides like a playbook, a set of skills that they can make use of. And these skills can really be anything. In the case of Kapoq, for those of you who use our data link service already, this is a database which gives you access to a lot of your own data that we collect for you in Kapoq that you can do with as you like. Our MCP server is like a layer on top of that, which in that sense, it lets AI agents query, use, and analyze, slice and dice your data link data however you like, and to use it in your own applications and your own workflows, and to, for example, present to customers and things like that. MCP servers can do a variety of different things. For us, it's more data related at Kapoq, but there are MCP servers, for example, that Amazon has launched for their advertising API. And this will actually let you take actions such as modifying the status of your campaigns, changing bids, and things like that. So it's not always just about data. But the cool thing about it is that you can take multiple MCP servers and use them together in your workflow with an AI agent. And you can actually, for example, combine Kapoq data with, let's say, the Amazon advertising API and make decisions based on your data and how we collect it for you, and then use that feedback to take actual actions at Amazon or elsewhere, if you like. You can also use it to create presentations and things like that. Under the hood, what the MCP server actually is, it's something that kind of gives you, again, this playbook view to the AI. So it tells you what actions it can take with the data, what kinds of queries are allowed, what's available. It describes the data that's in there, and it gives it some good rules of thumb, some examples, things like that.
Love it. Yeah, I think a lot of that's very important, George, and the MCP server piece and being able to connect multiple servers. I'm hearing from customers already that they're using MCP and they're connecting other servers like the Zapier so that they can work together. But yeah, that's very good context into how we have developed our own with its own context, information, instructions on how the underlying data lives and is available and accessible. Let's talk a little bit about what data is available. So fill us in, George.
Yeah, for sure. So again, this sits on the data we collect for you at Kapoq already. So many of you are familiar with what in the dashboard we give you and looking at inventory data, advertising data, that sort of thing. So we give you access to that data in the MCP server as well. And so this is multi-channel. If, for example, you have a presence not only on Amazon, but Walmart, for example, that data will be combined in there together in one unified format. If you're familiar, for example, with the advertising module and you see the different tabs like for campaign, ad groups, and targets, you can see how we at Kapoq envision like a useful way in which you can see that data and combine recent stats about your targets, for example, combine the parameters you set within Kapoq for your automated bidding and things of that nature. So these are all the kind of things that are available to you and combined in that same way. You see them in Kapoq and available to your AI agent through the server. So that's one of the unique things we provide at Kapoq is again, that way of combining the data. And there's like a performance implication there. Compiling all those stats for say your targets, you could do it on your own and collect your own Amazon data, but it's a hard computational problem. So we've already done that hard work for you and presented it in a way that's very easy to consume by the AI without you spending a lot of tokens or compute cycles on having to set it up in the first place. Some examples that Shelby has put up here that we include, we're starting to give you the rapid retail analytics and advertising market stream data too, and giving you some more granularity into that to be able to update that more intraday and let you use some of those more real-time analytics even, not only within the MCP server, but within our data link offering too. The neat thing about, again, these MCP servers is that you can join this data with other things outside of Kapoq. So for example, you have your own workflows, and Shelby might speak to this more later, but COGS, for example, you have Excel spreadsheets with information about that are custom. You can actually take that kind of information that you have locally and combine it with your Kapoq data seamlessly into your own workflow. And the final point here, just it's worth really pointing out, and this will make sense to people who are already using our data link, but this lives on top of our data link offering. You can have both. You could actually have the MCP server. You could also have direct access to your data, which is like a MySQL interface if you're familiar with SQL connections. And you can literally dev something up, which some of our customers have done in the past, and just get it directly yourself. Or you can use the AI agent to just grab it and not have to have any development knowledge whatsoever.
George mentioned a little bit about like the various disparate data sets. Are there different complexities involved based on the source of some of the data? And maybe in terms of MCP, how that plays a role?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the criticisms of MCP servers is that they can bloat your context window in your AI agent. And we can get into this more later as we go through the demos and if people have questions. But a really short summary is the context window is like the short-term memory of your AI model. And if you fill it up with too much stuff, the abilities of the AI model start to quickly degrade. And every model has its own percentage of that short-term memory being filled up before it starts performing poorly. But a really easy way to have this stuff fill up is to just connect too many things together. Some people, for example, are very much using this thing called OpenClaw these days. And that has pluses and minuses to it. But one minus is that it's a general agent that can look at your email, create presentations for you, remind you of things, basically respond to people on your behalf. It's a very general agent that has access to your computer and can do a lot of different things. The problem with being so general is that it's going to really quickly fill up its short-term memory. And there's a nice research paper on this. We can point to people later if they're interested in it, which really shows in some basic use cases, it's very easy for your OpenClaw agent, for example, to start up the day and have most of the context window full already if you're not careful. And even though it can still do stuff, it's not performing nearly as optimally as a more targeted AI agent that's, for example, specialized in doing a task like look at this data and make me a presentation about this topic. That more targeted prompt is going to do a lot better than this sort of generalized approach. So essentially, like you want to be careful about how you combine a lot of MCP servers together. You want to just be a little bit efficient with that context window, that short-term memory. And we'll go into some talk about that later, but to give you a quick idea, we tried to be pretty optimal with our MCP server. Right now, I did some measurements on it. If you have your agent just get familiar with everything that's in there, it will essentially use on Claude Opus 4.6, which has a 1 million token context window. It'll use about 2.1 thousand tokens, which is about 0.21% of the token window. So it's we try to have a very small footprint and be efficient for what we're offering, but it is, to Shelby, your point, it's easy to bloat in too many things and not realize you're degrading your AI performance.
That makes sense. You mentioned like bringing in external data. Is it safe to say you should use AI like Claude as if it's a team member and try to talk to it and explain things to it? If it's a colleague working with you too, is that information going to help it try to figure itself out on its own?
Yeah, for sure. The more specific you can be, sometimes the better. Also, it's very good to not have, and we could get into this, I think, with a slide later about some LLM best practices. So this is touching on that a little bit. But one of the things that you want to stay away from, for example, is you don't want to have this really long-lived chat session that you do everything in. It can seem advantageous at first, and it's perfectly fine to start getting used to AI agents if you're new to them, to go that route to start. But what you start to learn as you get more familiar with it is that you'll get better results if you start like a new session for every kind of task. And in fact, you can even get more advanced. And this isn't necessarily a requirement because Claude Desktop, which I think we'll talk about it in just a little bit, is pretty good at trying to manage this stuff for you without having to know too many details. But you can even do more power user kind of things where from a session, you can launch sub agents that you basically have a plan for, you want to generate a certain kind of presentation. You might, for example, generate a sub agent that analyzes the data in the Kapoq MCP server to look for a certain thing and then report back to your main session with the concise results. So again, you have the sub agent analyzing the data with a fresh short-term memory. So it's going to perform pretty optimally. And then it reports back with just a summary of what it found to your main session, which you then are using as like the quarterback to call the plays and build the overall final deliverable, which is the presentation.
That makes sense. Okay, it's bringing it all together, but through its own separate sessions. We can go through some of those examples. And it sounds like just exploring, getting familiar with how to use some of these AI tools ends up long-term being beneficial to each of us.
Yeah,
So we
absolutely.
talked, you're starting to kind of caveat and work our way through like best practices. Probably going to cover some of these. With Kpoc, obviously, we have the ability that as users to input tags to provide information around your product catalog and translate business logic into these roll-ups. Things like event stakes can also be super handy to provide like information around events that are occurring historically and maybe in the future. And so layering in some of these objects across specific accounts or product lines can provide more context, George. Like what comes to mind too in providing more context? I know you're prompting the AI with questions and you mentioned external sources. Anything else stand out that might be handy to just have as a reference point?
For sure, yeah. And this gets into the idea of a year or so ago, everyone was talking about prompt engineering. And that's important. You want to be specific and be able to utilize the AI and tell it what you want and be accurate. But it's now becoming, as you say, more of a context engineering problem where it's not only about the prompting. A great example is, say you have a workflow as an agency where you want to generate certain reports every week, maybe some things every day. What you really want to do is try to eventually get into this mindset of you don't necessarily are going to do a prompt every time you need that. You're going to set up some of these, what they're called markup files, these .md files, which are just human readable. So if you've ever seen a README file in a software package, it's like that. And you're going to basically set up a bunch of these for within your company as part of your workflow. And you're going to have it say, hey, this is a description of a task to generate like this executive weekly summary of how my clients are doing, for example. And you're basically going to set up a job, which I think we'll get into towards the end of the demo, to basically run that for you every week. And so you're getting away from like prompting and more into defining these agentic roles within your company with these markup files. And you're going to run these as specialized agents to generate this stuff for you.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I know we'll talk about this through some of the live demo, but say I'm an agency owner, I'm a brand, and I have specific ways of operating. You can provide like this file you're referring to provide context around how we operate. Maybe we're a full service organization. We support really all bits and pieces of our client's business, and we're involved in inventory restocks and advertising optimization and improving content. You're saying like if you give it some of that context, it can then know your business model so that it can provide more reliable like results after you're running those prompts.
Absolutely. That's exactly the right way to say it. And I think about it. And in fact, as we know, AIs can make mistakes, right? They can get things wrong. So a human should be in the loop to review these things. But to the extent that you build your skills on, and I do this too as a developer, like I have to do the exact same things to help facilitate how I want to write and test my code, for example. I make these files as well. And the better you get at doing that, the more reliable and consistent your output becomes.
Do you have a recommended like LLM setup? I know we'll cover Claude today, but in terms of all the LLMs out there or the setups in general, I know they're changing so rapidly, but yeah, what are your thoughts on what you've seen?
Yeah, this is a great question, Shelby. And really the best way to think about it is there's two pieces to this. One is the model, which I think is what most people hear about. Should I use Claude Opus 4.6? Should I use Gemini 3.1 Pro? Should I use ChatGPT 5.3, et cetera? And that's one part. That's like the brain. But the brain actually rides around in a car. And that's the other part that I think a lot of people don't always think about, but it's equally, if not becoming more important these days. In the car that they drive around in is like what you'd call like the agentic interface or the front end. So some people are familiar with the ChatGPT chat window on their browser. That's one of these cars. It's one front end you can use to interact with an LLM model. But there are different kinds of these. So one is Claude Desktop, which is a graphical interface you can run on Windows. It gives you a little more power. And as we'll see, I think in your demos, Shelby, will be in co-work mode there, where that actually lets the brain have access to more functionality on your computer to create presentations, to do things for you, that sort of thing. And then there's like another level of this, which is the command line interface or the CLI. And that's usually what I use actually. So I'll use, for example, I've used a lot of Claude Code CLI and Copilot CLI. Those are like you might think of them as like Ferrari cars essentially, and they can use multiple different models, but they give you a lot of fine-tuned commands that let you really manage that short-term memory of your models, do a lot more interesting things like orchestrate at a fine level different agents to take over tasks for you. Some of that's more geared towards coding, but there's really no reason someone, if they really want to become a power user of AI, couldn't get into the Claude Code CLI and start getting comfortable there and expand their capabilities. But I think for someone new or just in general, a great setup which I think we're going to demo from is using Claude Desktop and using that in co-work mode with either the Opus 4.6 or the Sonic 4.6 model. Opus 4.6 being their more high-end, more expensive model. And of course, there's different payment plans you can set up with any of these companies. And Claude, I think a lot of people are talking about, especially for coding and analysis, like people are getting very good results with Claude Opus 4.6. This is, as you alluded to, Shelby, sort of the arms race here. Interesting enough, a lot of people don't realize that the Google Gemini 3.1 Pro model, not the 3 model, but the 3.1, which came out 90 days later from the 3.0 model, which just, again, speaks to your point about how quickly these things are moving. But the 3.1 Gemini Pro model is actually leading on 16 out of the 18 AI benchmarks, including the ARC deep reasoning benchmark. So the Claude isn't necessarily the silver bullet by any means. And these models across the board are just getting better. But it's important, again, to use a good model with a good interface.
Right, depending on who you are that's commanding these APIs, it might be ones that are different for your use case, like you're saying. We'll definitely dive into Claude today, so that'll be a good example for everyone to see. And yeah, did you want to cover agentic versus conversational? I think we covered some of that, but maybe the difference between the two, simplified versus more robust, taking it a step further with agentic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we did just touch on it briefly. So yeah, the idea here is a lot of people, especially early on with ChatGPT, for example, are very used to the conversational use case, which you mentioned here. And this is essentially, you have a question. It could be anything. It could be something random on the internet. How do I fix my toilet? Like I have a plumbing problem. How do I fix something like that? You might even ask Google, right? Which now also puts Gemini in the search as well. So that's more one-off conversational use case. And in fact, developers were using that as a one-off case, and some still do. Some are like, hey, I want you to write me this quick script to do task X. I want you to grab this data for me and dump it to a CSV file. They might just, in one chat, ask the AI to generate that code snippet for them. So that's one way to use the AI. I think we're definitely moving toward this more robust agentic approach where you have just bigger projects. And for example, in the case of, an agency, You might have this workflow where you need to generate executive summaries. You may, from those summaries, need to generate a PowerPoint presentation to show your team. You may need to generate dashboards for some of your brand customers, those kinds of things. And this is now diving right into the agentic use cases, where again, you want to set up some of these like specific markup files and things like that, which have specialized tasks within that workflow. And you're going to basically orchestrate a bunch of these to handle those tasks for you. And then at the end, as a human, like even if you have a generated presentation, you're probably going to want to review that before you show it to your customer or show it to your team. But it gives you a great starting point, if not something that can be pretty fully finished if you've refined that prompt that goes into it.
Love it. Okay, very helpful to just know the difference between those two and how you can take it a step further. You know, what you're about to see, everyone here who's attending, is our MCP server connected to Claude. So this houses, for everyone's context, anonymized data from a partner who is actively managing brands on Amazon. We have a number of prompts ready. So essentially, you're using the LLM and asking it actual questions, offering it some instructions, possible context, examples to elicit a better response. And these templates that we'll walk through today, we'll get into. But if you're thinking, I want to ask it X during the demo, write it down, send it our way. We'll try to run a few of your queries for Claude and go collect some of this data. But we'll dive right in, and let me flip my screen over. So first and foremost, I think we, George, are already a little step ahead of everyone here. We have our connection all hooked up, but can you walk us through the connection and how access works?
Yeah, for sure. We have some knowledge base articles we have ready for this. But if you're using something like Claude Desktop and you have a business account, which I recommend some level of business account, you will basically have one or two people who are maybe administrators for this. And we have a step-by-step guide that shows you how to set up. It's called a connector in here. So we'll show you, your admin, how to set this up. And you can have this, once it's set up, be available for everyone in your organization to use who's on your Claude business account. Now, once it's set up, as Shelby's showing here in your chat there in Claude Desktop, you just hit that plus button and go to connectors, and it'll just be there as an option. And you can toggle it on or off depending on if you want to use it for whatever you're doing. And in this case, we call this anonymized tenant. As Shelby said, it's based on real data, but it's all fully anonymized. All the campaigns, ASINs, product descriptions, everything are renamed to a tropical themed advertising agency called Archipelago.
Perfect timing as spring's coming around here. So how about we prompt it a little bit? I have a few specific queries I'll pull up. We can drop them in. So I might do a few at a time because, George, while I'm grabbing these, talk about how the person who maybe invented the concept of MCP servers, like using, I guess, running a few sessions at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, Anthropic created this, and I think you might be referring to Boris Cherny, who actually was the creator of Claude Code CLI. So the tool, one of those agentic interfaces. But yeah, obviously he created the tool for the interface, and so not for MCP, but for the actual Claude Code tool. And he is a power user, of course, and he has like 15 sessions open in parallel, is how he describes it. And he's running like a lot of stuff while he sleeps and checks in on things. He's definitely like at this like manager level state with it, where he's managing like a team of these agents essentially.
Nice.
But go ahead, Shelby.
I was just gonna say, what we're seeing here, maybe you could talk through as well. Like it seems to be processing the prompt we put in place, and I see there's like a progress bar and a bunch of elements being handled. Can you just walk us through what it's looking at so everyone has like a little bit more context here?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you give it a prompt of any kind, especially Claude is known for this. It very much will walk you through in detail, like its quote unquote thought process and how it's getting to your answer essentially. So that's what you're seeing here. We pre-approve the actions to connect to the MCP server, but when you're first using it, you'll probably see, because by default, and it's a good default setting from a security standpoint, it will not just go out and take actions on your computer or talking to external servers like our server unless you authorize it. So once it's set up, it'll say, hey, am I allowed to run like the describe tables command on the Kapoq MCP server? And you can just say, yes, allow. And you can later on allow it for all your sessions if you want to. But it's a good security practice to see what it's doing, especially the first time you run it, and like manually approve the action so you get a handle on what it's doing.
Nice. It looks like it's moving along. It's chugging along. So like for everyone here who may have probably read this already, what we prompted it with was, if it could analyze, this is an agency account, bunch of accounts within it. If it could analyze month-to-date performance across all clients, considering factors like inventory, ad spend, which clients are having a strong start to the month compared to last year versus which clients are declining year over year and why. And so there's a lot that we're prompting it to do at one point in time. And George, maybe talk about like the historical data too while it's loading. Like Kapoq is integrated with clients for a number of years. Obviously, from integration, we get 2 years of history to start. But what is it looking at? Obviously, we give it, it has our database in mind. Fill me in on
Yeah,
like
it
how we
does.
do this.
It doesn't have every single thing in Kapoq, but we have the things that people have requested over the last couple of years for data link that people have been directly connecting to our database that way. And so it's a lot of the core advertising data, inventory data, ASIN related data. It includes ways to slice and dice it by the tags you've set up within Kapoq. So that's like kind of the high level thing. But we've been adding new things recently. So we've got subscribe and save data in there as well. We've got recently the buy box, rapid retail analytics data in there, things of that nature. But it's a lot of what, especially like, for example, if you again imagine the advertising module and you look at those campaign ad group target grids, it's nearly that exact same representation as a table of data.
Love it. So this is the output we received. Again, leaning on the data we have in our database, it's identified, right, the strong performing accounts, tropical theme, as you mentioned, and it's telling us this month's up 88% year over year. And a little more detail as we go through this, right? Another account that's being has some international expansion, also pointing out struggling clients that are seeing a decline. And hopefully it can pinpoint like where that is coming from. A cost is up, so on and so
And
forth. And
while
so
you're showing this, I think I see two questions here, one from
yeah, hop in
Lester
with.
and one from Evan. I'll just touch on really quick that I think are important. Lester is asking in this demo, how is the data being accessed by Claude, like the connectivity, for example, is it direct to some sort of SQL server, APIs, etc. Yeah, so Lester, it's through an MCP server. Basically it's a Python program that defines MCP actions. It uses fast MCP under the hood. And this basically gives it a description of the data that's available in a ClickHouse cloud database. So from the AI's point of view, it doesn't have direct access to the ClickHouse database, but that's ultimately the final step that the MCP server facilitates. So it's actually going to be basically masking those queries and things like that on the database through the MCP server actions. And then Evan has a good question about security. So he says, when the agent asks for permission to run on certain Kapoq tables, how would a user know if allowing access is safe? So that's a great question. You should always, especially if you're an organization and you have an admin for Claude who's set it up, you should probably double check a couple of things. In basically all the ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini business plans, there's a way to turn off telemetry and to not let your prompts to the model feedback to the model to train it. Like it's almost like a public leak potentially of your data that you want to try to avoid. So that's just a best practice we recommend, even whether or not you're using Kapoq's MCP connector, we would recommend you probably turn that off. We do that internally at Kapoq. But once that's in place and your admin has set up the connection, it'll be really clear. It'll say whatever you guys want to call it. It'll probably be called the Kapoq connector or something like that. It'll have our logo. And when it asks for access, it'll be very specific. Do you want to allow the AI to, for example, describe the data that's on this connector? And you can make a decision as a company to allow everyone to have that approved ahead of time, or you as the individual user within the company can manually do it each time. It's up to you, but it'll be very clear about what action it wants you to approve.
So yeah, and the underlying data again is in our data link, what we call it, and just showing that view of the specific tables that exist. It's quite robust, a lot of data sources that are accessible, and that information we talked about in the beginning of the presentation, the context around each metric is something that we've provided through the MCP, so it has an understanding of what's available to you and can put a lot of the heavy lifting on the actual context layer window that you talk about, George. And as you see here, yeah, it's pretty robust. The few more questions, just hop in here. I see Alon, you don't have to use Claude, for instance. This is what I have chosen to use. I think we've found a lot of success with using Claude's Pro plan. George, we could hook up really with our data link, our MCP server across any LLM. Is that fair to say?
Any is always a strong statement because people can make their own. There's open source ones like Llama CPP. People may have heard of that. That doesn't have MCP built in out of the box, though people have made open source add-ons to it essentially that do allow you to connect. But all the major ones that you know about that people have heard of, like ChatGPT in web or in their desktop modes or even in their CLIs, we've tested a lot of these combinations with ChatGPT, Hub Copilot, Claude Code, Claude Desktop. I've tried Gemini as well. Gemini Web actually, last time I checked, I don't think lets you connect to the MCP server through the web. I could be wrong about that. This stuff changes quickly, but through the Gemini CLI, you definitely can. So yeah, to your point, Shelby, you can use any of the major ones without issue. When Anthropic created MCP, it was intended to be an open industry protocol.
Nice.
So a lot of people have adopted it. And you can see like Google, Amazon have been recently creating their own MCP servers for various things.
Awesome. Yeah. So like to answer that question, there's a lot that you can use LLMs you can hook up to this. Going through a few additional queries, like we asked it to prepare a one-page performance brief for a specific account covering their month-to-date sales and ad efficiency, top performing markets, inventory health. So you're feeding it a lot of requests, and it's, as you can see here, giving us and spitting out an actual like performance brief that's in Microsoft Word. I think if that's the output that you desire and you're comfortable with, no problem. You can use that. I think you can also provide it more information to build like a PowerPoint, or the various outputs that it can derive and generate are, it seems almost endless. But yeah, here, just so everyone can see it.
And this is a good point. What Shelby's showing in this Word document, this is the kind of thing you can get when you put Claude Desktop into co-work mode. So it gives you some of those agentic abilities to create actual files, for example, on your computer like this. And I think someone asked, there was one question I just saw pass through. Someone asked, how accurate are these numbers? That's a great question. At the end of the day, you definitely don't want to trust the LLMs to do a bunch of math for you. But the nice thing is the way we've implemented the MCP server, and really, I think any good well-implemented MCP server should do this. It's the part of the context part of the MCP, which is it's this playbook, and it actually describes the actions again that the agent can take. And instead of the agent actually doing math itself, what it actually is doing is it's generating the commands with the actions that under the hood actually translate to SQL code. So it's really the code, the actions, and ultimately the code from those actions that are well defined that are doing the math. So it's not the LLM actually doing these calcs, but nevertheless, you should always double check and compare it against your own data, just like you do now. People who use Kapoq, will often, for example, and Shelby can testify to this better than I can, that people will often compare, for example, what we're showing in Kapoq versus Seller Central. You should treat this in a similar way. Definitely double check the results you're getting.
Yeah, it's a good call. I've run a few queries, prompts, and it's actually provided some great results. I think it's endless. I don't know if you guys have questions specifically around like what you might want us to ask the LLM, but what might be a nice segue is we have a good example that I would love to bring to light, which is as an agency, and this doesn't necessarily have to be an agency's route to auditing accounts. Maybe you have your own accounts within your portfolio that are important for you to audit and identify. Maybe you have a third party helping manage performance, but you might have this templated playbook that is an audit, and you tend to use downloadable files to derive and build these presentations. One thing that we've done, which is very cool, is we've taken one of these audit templates and we fed it into Claude and actually had it build out a prompt around all the details that we were looking to access from the underlying data that Kapoq has. You can think about this specific presentation being pretty critical and being a part of your business in terms of prospecting and identifying what would serve you as an agency to help make an impact for your clients. So uploading that prompt, for example, or that file's led us to actually build it out a prompt. So it's quite robust, but this TXT file I'm showing you here is exactly that. It looked at the actual data from this PowerPoint and it built a prompt for us that we can then use. So when you think about how you might start to make your processes a little faster, right? Save you time, cost savings with the energy you're putting into the work. You guys have done a lot of that already. And this is quite a cool way of deriving an audit and having it build it out even. George, maybe you could talk a little about this. Is probably going to take a little longer to process, so we'll put it in here and get it to go. But talk about like skills, for example. Can we train the LLM so it has specific skills to know how to do things the ways that we do it?
Yeah, exactly. And the skills are really a fancy way of describing the markup files we were talking about earlier. Literally, when you go into creating a skill for Claude, it's just going to be essentially a prompt. It's going to be human readable markup block of text that you write. And it's going to be something that, for example, you could be like, yeah, Cal, I didn't catch what your prompt was here, but whatever you're looking for here, you could make that a skill. You could just take that prompt and essentially put it in as its own markup file that just becomes a skill that you can then directly refer to in Claude Desktop. And whenever you say run this skill, it'll just do what you were just doing. And it'll launch it. You can launch it with a fresh context window. So again, you have that nothing filling in the short-term memory. So it can perform the best that the model is able to do each time from a fresh session.
Nice. While this is running too, like I see we have a request from an audience member. I'll pull it in here. We could run it. Dinar, thanks for sending this. So essentially you want us to, and we can run through this right after this. I'll put this prompt in for you.
Yeah, you can just pull up another. Yep.
But
that's the thing that Shelby's doing. You can actually run multiple of these simultaneously. And I think towards the end, if we have time, I'll get into the scheduled task, which I think will be useful for a lot of people.
Totally. And why don't we revisit the actual prompt? You brought up a good point, George. Like for the audit itself, this TXT file is like extremely thorough, but we can dig into what we want it to look for. So like overall advertising performance, it's look at a 60-day window and identify performance across just high level, it appears. Headline advertising metrics. You can see here, it's like performance split by ad format, SP, SPSD, researching performance based on, what is it, a match type, it appears, like research spread versus manual performance spread, branded versus non-branded. And you keep going, right? Wasted spend. I think there's 17 sections within this audit that it's going to go derive and pull from our database from, right, the MCP server connectivity. It's like wasted spend analysis. We've given it a lot of really robust detail to help it identify like the top 25 wasted targets by spend, search terms with 0 orders, campaign structure and bid strategy, product level performance, total revenue and tacos, traffic and listing conversion. A lot of this is, again, very much advertising. Here you go. You got inventory health, new to brand customer acquisition stats, budget utilization, capped campaigns, top converting search terms for harvesting, same SKU versus Halo ad sales. So that's interesting. Like maybe there's some overlap that helps get you to some cross sells, competitor and category targeting, buy box. So we've got some more business reports, traffic data, archived and pause and archive campaign inventory. So we'll look at all of that. DSP even, right? We've got DSP data flowing into Kapoq. If you have your seats and your advertisers set up. And so, yeah, it's got a bunch of instructions. So extremely robust. And I think what the end piece here is, it's going to try to build this PowerPoint for us, but also I think we asked it to also summarize like the information that's identified from this. And as an agency, for example, like we want to focus on clients we can make an impact for. It'll probably tell us whether or not they see opportunity. And I know I used to be in a role years ago at an agency where I run audits for prospects. I'd spend hours on end building out these specific presentations and I derive an answer. But it was only after I had a chance to analyze this was I able to identify if there's potential for our business to win, to pitch this customer and be honest with them based on our tactics and how we approach management. I'm hoping that this will give us a nice response. Obviously, a lot of data it's pulling, but it'd be great in a few minutes to see this and we could run you guys through it.
And that's a big prompt that, so I know it was generated, and there was someone asked what kind of code that was. So that was basically human readable text interspersed with some SQL commands. It can actually generate some queries that can be passed through. We have a lot of security checking on those, but the AI is also instructed with some curated context to give it like what more specific queries it can actually use aside from the general actions. So that's what Shelby had the AI generate there that we were looking at. And so the interesting thing there is you might even take what Shelby was showing there and break that up into more specific tasks. You might have like specific categories, like here's my advertising, or here's my DSP specific stuff. Here's my sales stuff. You might break that up a little more. And again, this is like just getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty of like effectively managing that context window, that short-term memory that you have in your model. So you're not trying to do too much at once in a single session.
Nice. And I think we're getting some good questions, right? What we're seeing here is a lot of analysis, George. We're seeing results spit out from what the LLM is identifying based on our prompt, but there's a lot of like users who actually do the work and they try to execute on some of these problems, these tasks that are in front of them. And so whether it's using Kapoq or an LLM to identify what these actions might be, you still got to do the work. So talk to me a little bit about like today, Kapoq's MCP server and Obviously, there's other MCP servers that can communicate with one another that might do work. Fill me in on what that is. And I know, Chris, you alluded to that. Does it have write access? Would be good to know how this can be used in terms of actions, even with Kapoq today. I know there's a lot of customers on the call, or, with,
Yeah, absolutely. No,
yeah.
this is a great category of questions here. And to specifically answer Chris here, it's only read access. So you can't write back anything in the database. But it's not to say you can't write elsewhere. Like if you have your own database or other ways you want to store it or generate presentations, Excel files from the data, you can totally do that. You can read our data with your agentic workflow and generate anything you want from it. And in terms of like where this is going, there's interest in this. We wanted to give the overview of the MCP server and start giving you some ideas of what you can do. But another one we might have planned, if there is interest, is Claude specifically release the Excel plugin and PowerPoint plugin. And there's ways you can actually, for example, many of you know there's, for example, bulk uploads for modifying properties of your campaigns, targets, etc. There's bulk uploads for generating your keyword harvesting rules is a great one. And this is maybe where we see some of the product development going in Kapoq in terms of the AI usage is helping you use your Kapoq data to, for example, make it more easy for you to quickly create harvesting rules that make sense and that are useful. And then, so instead of manually going through in the bulk upload, you can have it generate something for you and put that back into Kapoq and create your rules much more quickly. So that's kind of where I see this going a little bit, is that in 2 years, who knows what's going to happen with SaaS software. But I think it's important for us to acknowledge that the landscape is probably going to change quite a bit in 2 years. And I do think that a lot of our customers, developers, really everyone, no matter what they do, are going to be using workflows more like this and relying on them. And one of the advantages is it's fully customizable to your doing. So I do think you're going to see a lot of the work start to happen here rather than necessarily in a centralized SaaS application.
It's a good point. Talk to me a little bit about, like, obviously our custom code, right? There's domain expertise that we have that other software companies have that are applied to their apps. Whereas what you see here is we all have domain expertise, but there's probably like advanced layers algorithmically that are probably hard for Claude. You talk about being not perfect at numbers, or any LLM perfect with numbers. Talk to me a little bit about like the complexity in someone like you writing code for a bidding algorithm or something of that nature.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what it hits the heart of is, what are all our jobs going to look like soon, right? This is like kind of the $1 million question as a developer, as an agency, right? So people might ask like, well, why do we need developers anymore? A brand might ask, why do we need an agency? But I think you nailed it, which is that this allows us to focus more on is our domain expertise. So you can see like some of the questions you're asking, someone who's focusing on a brand and building whatever they build to sell on Amazon or that kind of thing, they're not going to necessarily know to ask these questions, even if they have the same tools anyone else does for AI. That's where an agency's expertise comes into play and their domain experience. They're going to know what to ask, how to use it, what kind of workflows are needed with these tools to manage your online presence on behalf of the brand. Same for developers. There's things that a non-developer wouldn't know to ask, wouldn't know to check, wouldn't know how to design efficiently. Even though the AI can make it much more accessible for someone with zero knowledge. There's Cursor, Anti-Gravity. These are excellent tools, but they've done studies on this. The kind of quality of very good experienced software engineer, the quality of what they'll produce, given a more complex software design task, is going to be much higher quality and much more secure too than someone who has no knowledge in coding in that domain. So I think the good news, I think our jobs personally, I believe they're all safe for all of us. But I do think that how we work is going to change in a good way. It's going to make us a lot more productive, in my opinion.
That's a very important like element to like what we're all trying to understand. So I appreciate the detail there. This thing's still going, and I think it's writing, is it JavaScript, George?
It looks like that's what it's doing. Yeah. So that's the cool thing about Cowork. It's going to do whatever's needed, including generating code to accomplish your task. While that's still running, Shelby, do you want me to show the scheduled task real quick?
Yeah, let's do that. So I'll pass you the screen and we can review this.
Okay. And then when it's ready, I'll just cut back to you.
Yeah, so you're going to tell us a little about the schedule you're referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, popping up. I see Claude. Yep.
Okay, you see it. Okay, excellent. Okay, so this is my Claude desktop setup. Normally, I actually use Claude CLI, Claude Code CLI. This is not my normal workflow here, but I wanted to show something that's in the vein of something I might do as a developer that you can also do, even if you're not a developer. And Claude Desktop makes this very easy. So what's really cool is they have this feature over here, scheduled. And other tools, AI tools, have similar things or are developing them. So this is not necessarily unique to Claude. So what you can do is you can create a new task. Now you're going to see that this little pop-up appears and it warns you, do you want to keep your computer awake? So this is an important thing. High level, what we're going to do is we're going to schedule a prompt or a task to run at a certain time in the future. And this can run at regular intervals. So if you want to generate a weekly, daily, monthly report, you can set this up ahead of time and it'll generate and it'll be waiting for you when it's done and when it fires off on whatever date. So what you do need to do though is keep the computer awake, because if your computer's not on, it's not going to run it. So if someone doesn't have the ability to keep their desktop in their home office or their office on all the time, there are ways around this. We can chat with people. You can obviously use AWS, you can use Google Cloud, Azure, set up like a virtual machine where you would run this and it could be on all the time, for example. So there's ways where you don't need to run this on your own like office computer necessarily. But with that being said, what you do is pretty simple. You create a new task, give it a name, a description, and the prompt. And then here in the frequency, again, you can see hourly, daily, weekdays, weekly. There's some customization there. And under the more options, you can actually give it the model you want to use. For Claude, if you can afford the tokens and you have a good plan, like I do recommend using their best model, Opus. I think it does generally get better results, but Sonnet is perfectly capable as well, runs a little faster, and can definitely do a lot of things for you, reporting and things like that. But leave this up to you. Use the best model if you can. And then what you do is you just would create this. And I'm not going to run it now in the interest of time, but I already have one created, this weekly briefing. And Shelby, you may have run this prompt already. I'm not sure.
No,
okay.
Walk us through it.
Yeah, for sure. So this is the instructions. So using the Archipelago connector, it's very good practice, especially when you're setting up one of these scheduled tasks, to actually refer to the connector by name. So you're very specific, especially if you have multiple MCP connectors hooked up. You want to make sure you're using the right thing. So this is good enough. Just use whatever name you give it. For many of our customers, they'll probably just call it the Kapoq connector. And then it says, give me a weekly executive summary across all clients, flag which accounts are trending up, which are trending down, and call out anything that needs urgent action before the weekend. So you can always run it manually to test it out. I'll give you on Opus, this takes about 5 minutes to run. So what happens is when it's done, and I've already run it before this presentation, but what happens when it's done, you'll see under the scheduled tab, the results. And so you can see weekly briefing, because that's the name of this task. And so it'll have a list on every date that this runs, and you'll have a running history of it. So you can click on this. And so this is what it generated. And it'll say, give you a little bit of information about what it did, but it'll actually just give you the executive briefing here. And so here's that report. Sorry, let's scroll up here. Here's the report. And I'm not going to go into a ton of the details about it, but the cool thing is you can now just interact with this thing once it's already done. Like maybe it ran while you were sleeping on Monday or Friday night, and you can actually now interact with these results. So I told it to generate a PowerPoint presentation that I can share with the team. So it does that, and then you can view your presentation right here. And so here, it's going to load up here in PowerPoint in just a moment. And here it is. And so here's a slide deck. Again, you want to review this stuff before you send it out. Here's a ready-made slide deck based on your executive briefing that you can now share with your team, say every Monday or whenever you run it.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. And yeah, I know like organizations, anyone, right? There's a specific cadence you're reporting, like a weekly business report or a monthly recap with action items for the coming months. Yeah, this is very cool to see. And having a scheduler do this on your behalf, you show up, you evaluate it, probably saves a ton of time. Using the underlying data. I think we have 2 minutes left. Maybe what we can do is just like segue to close this out. So I know there's
do you want me to give the screen back to you, Shelby?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So yeah, just to close this out, the audit, by the way, is still running. A lot of data to be pulled, but we've seen it in action. Yeah, produce some pretty awesome results, similar to like that PowerPoint you were just refining. Oh, here it is. It's pulling it up. Look at the timing of that. It's a document here in this case, but pretty exciting to like now have our template populated with information for this prospect that we're pitching later in the week. That said, again, there's so much power within these LLMs. We're extremely excited to be offering our MCP server to our clients and anyone in the market that's interested. George, you've done a wonderful job really like debugging and building out a strong product. But yeah, for everyone here who's attending, who's interested in what's next, our plan is to begin with the beta. So those of you who are interested and you have yet to reach out with interest to mention you want to be on the list, do follow with your customer success manager, with myself, with your team. I'm Shelby again, and we've got George here. You can reach us both. It's just our first names at kapoq.com. But we'll be working to get some of these betas built out beginning early next week and give you guys an opportunity to play with it yourself and yeah, have at it. We hope today was helpful in really painting the picture of how you could use our Kapoq MCP and what it can do for you and how it can enhance your day to day. Thank you, George, obviously for spending some time and really giving your 2 cents on all this. It's ever evolving, and I'm sure we'll probably meet again to go over more of this with time. And again, for customers, individuals who are interested, you can fill out a form on our website for a demo. It'll get to the right person, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you again for hopping in here and spending some time with us today. And really excited to be bringing this to market. George, any final comments from you?
Yeah, this, as Shelby said, this is beta. So there's more things we can add to the data link. I know there were a lot of questions about, can I check this or that I already have in my workflow? We can certainly make that stuff work for you if it's not available in data link. Data link itself has always been an evolving product based on customer feedback. So we can add data sets that are in Kapoq that are not there over time. So yeah, happy to customize this for whatever you guys are doing. And Shelby, thank you for running the presentation today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So everyone, so we'll have a recording we'll be sending out. If you want access to that, you'll be on the list to receive follow-up. But yeah, thanks again for joining, and we hope to talk with you all very soon. Have a great rest of the day, guys. Thanks, George.